Hello, and welcome to Wealth Matters, where we discuss the opportunities and challenges of preserving and managing wealth. This show is presented to you by Frankel, a law firm dedicated to resolving disputes involving your wealth, whether through your will, your trust, your business, or your investments. For news, pictures, and tips, go to our new website at gaslowitzfrankel.com or follow us on Twitter at Estate Dispute. Our show's hashtag is Wealth Matters. Your hosts today are myself, Robert Port, and my partner, Craig Frankel, and today we're talking about financial and estate planning for young adults.
So now let's start and introduce our guests, and I'll start with my left, which means nothing to our listeners. Alicyn, tell us who you are and what you do.
Hi, Craig. Thanks for the introduction. I'm Alicyn McLeod with Atlanta.tax. I manage taxes for people who care about their money.
And Chloe, tell us about yourself.
Yes, my name is Chloe Moore. I have a firm, Financial Staples, based in Atlanta, but I serve clients nationwide, and I work with young professionals on comprehensive financial planning.
And Cherish, last but not least.
My name is Cherish De la Cruz. I have my own estate planning and business planning law firm, and I help young families and small businesses.
Okay, so we started off, and today's topic talks about estate planning for young adults. So I think the real first question for each of you is, what do you define as a young adult?
You're looking at me, Craig. This is Alicyn. So, young adult, anybody younger than I am, whatever my current age is. I think it probably
14?
Oh, thanks. Mid-30s, younger.
Is that what you're looking at, Cherish?
Yes, generally, I would say 20, maybe 25 to 34 for me.
Chloe, the same?
Yeah, I'd actually define young professionals as 30s and 40s.
Okay.
Okay, so if that's the case, whatever the demographic is, why does financial planning and estate planning for that cohort matter? They're young. I still remember those days. You think you're never going to die. Your family knows what you want. You may be single. Why does it matter? Let's start with you, Cherish.
For me, working with younger clients, I have seen what happens when people don't plan. So most recently, I have a client who's now a widow. They were high income earners. The father was a breadwinner, and he died unexpectedly. He was very, very young. He was 32 years old, had a 2-year-old son and a young wife. He was the breadwinner of the family, and now because nothing was put in place, his family, is at a loss, and so it's a scavenger hunt. It's trying to figure out what the assets are, doing a guardianship and a conservatorship for the financial assets. So seeing what happens when people don't plan.
And I should mention, just for our listeners, if you have a sudden death, that is the worst, that is the most difficult time for the survivors to think rationally. You want them to use that time to grieve and take care of their loved ones, and thinking about the numbers is really just difficult.
And Chloe, why does financial planning matter, however you describe financial planning for that age cohort?
Yes, I think financial planning is important to start as early as possible. I know we had a couple of discussions, before we started, but just thinking about as you're getting older and getting closer to retirement, what would you have paid, or what would you have given up to be able to do financial planning earlier and put yourself in a better position for retirement? So a lot of people, they just think that they're going to live forever, like you said, and that they have so much time on their hands to really think about planning later on. But the earlier you start, the better.
So ask your parents what they wish they did. Don't ask them what they did.
Right, and
Right.
what I've realized looking back is that time is on your side, particularly with financial planning, and the value of accumulating money and let it compound over time. And the way it was illustrated to me was I heard somebody once ask the question, when's the best time to plant a shade tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time? Today.
Exactly.
And that's, for me, that sort of brought home how to do it. So Alicyn, why is, you're the CPA here, why is, most people think about taxes and that kind of stuff and just, get ill? Why should why should that be something young professionals focus on?
That's a really good question, and it plays into everything that everybody's just been saying, is that taxes are pretty much the biggest expense for anyone. It's not your housing, I promise, it's your taxes. So if you're starting out, in your 20s, 30s, or even 40s, thank you, Chloe, for that generous thought that people in their 40s are young professionals. That makes me a young professional. Taxes being your biggest expense, if you can cut that down early on, then that time horizon that you have to invest and grow your money, grow your wealth over time, then that base just increases. So whether that's if you're a C-level employee and you're getting stock options, things like that from your company, or you're starting a business and you want to know the best way to structure that from a tax perspective, getting those good answers early on just sets you up for success going forward.
And I want to note something. So I serve on a lot of boards for charities, and I'm looking at the 401ks or the 403bs where you get to save money in a retirement account. And many of them will match the contributions, but I have found that most employees, particularly young employees, don't take advantage of that. And when we're looking at tax savings, given the new tax laws, it seems to me that there aren't a whole lot of tax savings you can do as a young person. Are you finding, Alicyn, that young people are taking advantage of 401ks, or that is a good vehicle, or what?
I find some people do and some people don't. Firstly, it's a cash flow issue, and really pretty much anything that anybody here in this room is doing all comes back to cash flow. So for some folks that are first starting out, they really don't have the funds to be investing. I'll be straight up honest. If someone comes to me and they have a lot of issues, probably one of the first issues I would say, especially if they have children, is do you have an estate plan in place? Have you gone to see an estate attorney? Spend a few $1,000s on that before you put that in your 401k, because if you croak tomorrow, you want to make sure that your kids don't go somewhere that the state has decided. So there's kind of, a hierarchy of financial planning, which Chloe and Cherish can talk a lot more about. But back to your question, Craig, about whether people are putting money in these 401ks. Most of my clients, and it's sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, because if folks don't have the funds, generally they're not coming to me as clients. But so I guess that's really more confirmation bias. But most of them are putting into their 401ks, but probably a lot of them are only doing it up to the point they get that employer match, because that is free money, and that is definitely a good thing. I think with a lot of folks, and I think Chloe can talk more about this, it's a question of, do they want to put it in a regular 401k or a Roth 401k? I see the Roth IRAs being very, very popular with young people. They seem to be all over that, and with tax rates as low as they are these days, that's really not a bad idea. So the long answer, the short answer to that long answer is really, it depends.
So Alicyn mentioned something about cash flow, and Chloe, I know we asked you to give us some thoughts before we started, and number one for you is cash flow. So tell our listeners a little bit how you approach that. They get their income, a paycheck. If they're lucky, they may get money from a trust or other regular distributions, maybe a family business.
Yeah, trust me, most don't.
How does one how do you go about sort of helping people deal with their cash flow?
Definitely. The first step is really just having awareness of what's coming in and what's going out. When I work with a lot of my clients, they have no clue how much they spend in any given month, and where that money's really going. So that's one of the first things I do with them, is help them come up with a budget and figure out, okay, what's really going out.
Are there internet tools or things that can help us? Because I've got kids in their 20s, and knowing where their money goes is shocking that they know nothing.
Yes.
So are there tools that you could at least direct young adults to start off with to get a better awareness?
Yes, there's a lot of online tools. Some of the most popular ones are Mint. Mint.com, and then also You Need a Budget is a good budgeting tool that some of my clients use as well. But yeah, there's a lot of tools. Some people like to just use good old Excel and download transactions and kind of categorize and see where things are going.
So tell, not that we're advocating anything in particular, but tell our listeners a little bit about how those programs work. I use Mint. I've tried to get my sons to use it. And I find it very helpful, because if you link up, and what you do is you go in, you link your accounts, you link your investments, and it will regularly report to you what's going on. And you can start to get a sense of, as you say, where things are going, what your bills are, how your investments are hopefully increasing over time.
Yes, Mint is a great tool to basically just upload all of your transactions based off of your bank accounts and link everything together. And so you can then categorize your transactions and kind of see where things are going in different categories. You can set budgets for yourself and receive alerts if you go over your eating out budget, as an example. So it's a great tool to kind of see where you are based on, and compare that to where you want to be, in different categories.
My daughter found out that she was spending 20% of her social budget on coffee. I'm not joking. It was a shocking number to her. It didn't shock me.
Yeah.
Cherish, tell me, if someone came to you and we're talking about estate planning, what's the first kind of tool they should look at? What's the most important thing? And let's talk about a young person who doesn't have children versus a young person perhaps who's married or does have children.
Okay, so typically, and this is what I recommend to parents who have children going off to college. So part of the reason why I say you should have your parents, if they're in college, set up or help you pay for an advanced health care directive. Once you turn 18, your parents don't have access to your medical records. So if you're at the hospital and you need your parents to make your medical decisions for you, or somebody else that you trust, you need to have an advanced health care directive.
And let's be clear on this, because I've seen a lot on different websites. Is there a difference between like a medical authorization or a release and an advanced directive?
Yes. So there's a HIPAA release, which allows you to get medical records. So if your parents, let's say you went to UGA and you're off to college and they needed to get your medical records because they need to transfer you to a hospital, your parents would be allowed to get your medical records at the UGA Medical Center. And then an advanced health care directive also allows you to also change to nominate someone to make your healthcare decisions. So, God forbid, your student, your child gets into a car accident and your parents need to make medical decisions for you. They'll have the authorization to do that as well, too.
And is that different from, a lot of folks come to us and say, in a different context, well, I've got power of attorney.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So then there's also the financial power of attorney. So, college student, Michael, he goes to college and he opens up his bank account. But parents need to know, okay, Michael is running his rent and all of his expenses through the bank account, but parents don't know what needs to be paid for. So, if Michael got into a car accident and they needed to pay his rent and his parents didn't know what his rent, the bank is not going to allow the parents to get access for that information.
And by the way, on the new rules regarding access to social media or access to bank accounts, people ignore and always say, I accept the terms of agreement. Within the privacy rules, you can give access or limited access or conditional access to somebody for those types of situations, but you have to choose it.
Okay. Yes.
And while we're talking, Cherish, about situations involving young people, tell our listeners a little bit about the issues that arise with digital access after someone passes. This is, my sense, is a brave new world, and the Googles and the Facebooks and the Instagrams of the world are trying to figure out how to deal with it, and you, as a planner, are trying to figure out how to deal with it.
Well, there's a new power of attorney in Georgia that was implemented about 2 years ago, and so that allows for digital access. However, there is a difference in trying to reach Google and get those accounts. There's a practical. So, you've got the law, then you've got the practical matters and actually accessing that information. But it does help to have, digital access and authorization for people to actually access your accounts. So also like your bank accounts, going online, your social media profiles. And then, if somebody is, a gamer and they've accumulated all of these, I think they're coins or money, but there's an actual value for playing these video games, that actually has an estate value. There's a value.
There's value to playing. I'm sorry, what?
Yes, yes. Surprisingly, yes. And so there is a certain amount of value, and you have to decide who you want to pass that on to. You wouldn't think that, but now YouTube. They have these arenas now with YouTube gamers, and thousands of people will watch them. And so just as as society's changing and we're having more digital access to things, then, you've got to think about and plan for those things as well, too.
So Cherish was referring to things that are digital. It made me think of cryptocurrencies. Alicyn, any thoughts on how that plays into the tax work you do, and whatever advice you give folks about that?
I think what he's saying is, will you get caught?
Yes, you will. And that's fairly recent. Not all countries are approaching this the same way, but in the U.S., the IRS has said that digital currencies are treated like a lot of other capital assets. So if you, buy Bitcoin at $100 US, and Bitcoin then later sells for $1,000 US, and you sell one Bitcoin, you have a $900 capital gain. And it's short term, long term, depending on how long you held the coin. And that the IRS is expecting to see that, and they have reports from some of these major traders, so that they're the cryptocurrency platforms. So they're seeing who has ownership.
Do they get 1099s like a normal sale or something else?
I don't believe they're necessarily across the board getting those, but there are some platforms out there that are starting to issue those, and they're starting to issue them in ways that are somewhat friendly to be able to be reported on your tax return. In probably the last year or so, maybe before that, if you were getting any kind of reporting, it's probably more like a download of transactions. I got a few of those from clients this past year, and they're micro transactions basically. So you it's almost like day trading. There may be something to go along with your return that has hundreds of pages of transactions, and you basically get to gain or loss that's $200 US. So but the IRS is figuring it out, and they're like, yeah, if your name's on this list at some point, we're expecting to see some transactions. You're not holding this indefinitely. We know you're going to sell it. So, but I am finding for most of my clients that hold digital currencies, the actual impact to their tax returns is generally pretty nominal. I think that would certainly change if you had Bitcoin that's 5 years old or something like that. But
you're listening to Wealth Matters, the radio show where we discuss the opportunities and challenges of preserving and managing wealth. We are your hosts, Robert Port and Craig Frankel from the fiduciary litigation law firm of Gaslowitz Frankel. We are talking with Chloe Moore, CFP, Principal and CEO of Financial Staples, Cherish De la Cruz, attorney and partner with De la Cruz Law, LLC, and Alicyn McLeod, CPA, CFP at Atlanta.tax. And we are talking today about financial and estate planning for young adults.
Now, Cherish, I'm going to ask you the second question. So first you said, what happens when your kid goes to college? And you said, let's make sure that they're protected for both access to their money if there's a problem and for medical. Now let's shoot ahead a little, and you're thinking about getting married. And I don't mean you personally. A young adult is thinking about getting married. Are there different considerations?
Yes, there are different considerations. So you want to do the planning for your spouse. And so definitely you want to have at least a wills-based plan, which means that you're creating a will and leaving, if you wish, everything to your spouse. Some people, they will, forget to update their beneficiary designations for their spouse. And so they'll forget to put their wife's name. So they'll have a 401k, and to check it regularly. So that's something that you definitely have to do. I've seen situations in my practice where they think that they've put their spouse's name on the beneficiary, like their life insurance, their 401k, and they haven't, or that provider changed third-party services, and it defaulted back to the estate. One of the reasons why you want to do that is because there's a priority of creditors that get paid after somebody passes away. And so if there's a lot of debt, you have to kind of think about that. But that's more on what Chloe would.
Yeah. Well, we would hope young people don't experience this, but what we often see in our practice is a failure to change a beneficiary designation, and then the ex-spouse dies, and he or she's never changed the beneficiary
Right.
designation, so that the ex-spouse gets sometimes hundreds of thousands or more dollars.
Chloe,
So-
let's talk about the debt, because I think it's clear we are not in the old society where your husband or your spouse's debt or your parents' debt are yours. So if you're young and you're building up debt, let's say, for example, college education debt, if you leave money in your estate, it's going to go to pay off that debt. Whereas if you use a beneficiary designation of whatever the asset is, life insurance, it won't. So when you're talking to young people, what do you tell them about management of debt?
Yes, for young professionals, I think some of the most common forms of debt are student loans, and that's something that's has a big impact on their ability to save for their future. And so I help a lot of clients with student loans and just managing that debt. I know with federal student loans, those are forgiven at your death. If you have private student loans, then yes, that affects your estate.
And the reason I ask the question, we see a lot of TV commercials about how you can consolidate the debt and get a lower number. I think a lot of our listeners don't realize you're taking it out of the federal rubric and the protections, and you're now getting a private loan.
Yes.
And so you're changing all the protections. I'm not sure people realize that.
Yes, that's something that people definitely make mistakes on when it comes to consolidating student loans or refinancing student loans. So that's something that I work with clients on as well, to just look at the situation. What type of employment do they have? Are they at a nonprofit or working for a nonprofit? Are there opportunities for forgiveness? And then if not, what can we do? What's the best option for paying down that debt?
Let's circle back a little bit to newly married folks. Chloe, how do you suggest, and there's no singular way to do this, but how do you suggest that they merge their finances or deal with their finances going forward?
Yes, for most people, I think the easiest way is to have a joint account to cover the household expenses, and then each spouse have a separate account to cover some of their personal expenses. And then maybe just have, on the joint side, if they have an agreement to say, if we spend more than X amount of dollars, then we'll consult with each other about that expense for the household.
Cherish, on that issue, families, people that get married, come from different places in their lives. So they may come from a wealthier family, or they may have the opportunity or something to inherit wealth. I see a lot of young people going ahead and merging their assets, kind of putting it in the same bucket, whether it be an investment account, but most often buying a house together using what I would refer to as inheritance or family money, and without making any distinctions. Is that a good idea?
No, it isn't a good idea. And so, sometimes when you have wealthier families, they will put their children's assets in trust for them. And then what I have seen from my own practice is they will take assets from that trust and they will put it in, their joint bank account. So once it comes from protected money, then to mixed money. Let's just think of it that way. And then, what happens if somebody gets divorced? You're young, you're married now, but 10, 15 years from now, you're contemplating divorce.
And by the way, the divorce rates are interesting. For young people, it's going down. It's below 40%. But for people over the age of 50 whose children are going to college, it's going up. So the blended divorce rate right now is still around 50%.
And so you have to think about that. You never want to mix that money and those assets together. So I always recommend that to my clients. And then I also think, even though, they might be recently married, have young children, you have to think down the line for adding what we would call remarriage protections. So, God forbid, you pass away, and then your your spouse, who's, the survivor of the relationship, wants to get remarried. How do you protect your children and make sure that the assets that you have either worked really hard for or your parents have really worked hard for really go to those children. So making sure that you have provisions in the trust that address that. And then also, just making sure that, if you do get remarried later on, that you do change your beneficiary designations.
And Alicyn, we're talking a little bit about marriage. Let's and I'm by no means any sort of tax person, but I understand there's something called married filing separately versus a joint filing. Can you maybe give a brief overview as to when that would apply and why folks would think about either option?
And does that exist now with the new Tax Act? Because I can't remember the answer to that.
Yeah, it's interesting. If I could change anything about tax law, well, I change a lot of things. But one thing I would definitely get rid of is this sort of antiquated idea that we should combine tax situations with each other when we get married. It's hard enough to combine financial situations. I know Chloe can speak to that. It's hard enough to combine legal situations. I know Cherish can speak to that. But I have a number of clients who are married and have had issues combining their financial situation. But then I tell them, oh, well, unless you want a really bad tax answer, you're going to need to combine your financial situation simply to file tax returns together. That's very problematic, especially when one spouse has a business and the other one doesn't, and withholdings and estimated tax payments and all that get very confusing. On the other hand, I have a number of clients who have lived together for a long time in a partnership and are not married, and so they don't have the opportunity to file jointly, which a lot of times can hurt them, but a lot of times can present opportunities. Again, if one person's a business owner, one's not, maybe they can one can employ the other and shift some income around to push income to someone in a lower tax bracket. It's really a frustrating situation for a lot of folks, because just these days, just because you're married doesn't mean that you share a financial situation, and because you're unmarried doesn't mean you don't.
And let's follow up on that. Statistically, people are getting married later. We have a lot of same-sex or same-gender marriages, but we also find a lot of people living together in some combination where they're not married. And how does one think about tax planning when you're not married?
Well, I'll give you one example. I have a couple of clients. They've lived together for a number of years. They're both men, and they've realized that, marriage is now on the table. Do we want this or not? And so they're still exploring that. But in the meantime, they've got a piece of property that they've owned and lived in for a number of years. And there is, and I'm sure probably everybody in this room is familiar, maybe our listeners are not, with the so-called 121 gain exclusion, which is your best friend in tax. And it says if you sell your house and you have a gain on your house sale, as long as you meet certain requirements, you can exclude up to $250,000 of gain from being taxed. That jumps to $500,000 if you're married. So, for them, I said, okay, I would love for you guys to get married if that's what you want, but you need to talk to me first so we can plan for your house sale. I don't want them to sell first and then get married later and then, kind of get hosed there on the tax break. So that would just be one example.
Chloe, answer that question kind of from the planning perspective. You are an unmarried couple and you're living together for a while. You may not yet have decided for it to be a permanent relationship. Maybe you have. What difference is there for planning for an unmarried couple versus a married couple?
Yes, I do have also some clients that have been in long-term relationships and are not married. And it's really a matter of, from a cash flow perspective, figuring out, what your joint goals are as a household and figuring out how much you want to combine. Some people do set up joint accounts, just as if they were married, just to cover just the household expenses. And things for the household, and then keep everything else separate. And some people just keep things completely separate. But it really just depends on the relationship and their specific goals.
Cherish, let's circle back to something you mentioned before, which I didn't want to pass, which was beneficiary designations. And it occurs to me that a lot of young couples with young children, they get the form from the bank, the brokerage firm, whatever it is, and they say, who's your beneficiary? Oh, we'll list, Junior, who is, 7 years old, 2.
Yes.
Is that a good idea?
No.
But often that's the best money manager in the family.
Perhaps. So no, and so there's this misconception out there that if you list a minor, your child, that they're able to get that money, and they're not. So minors should never be listed on beneficiary designations.
So what happens if, the brokerage firm, the life insurance company, they pay the money to who's listed? What happens then?
So the parent or the surviving parent will have to what we call a conservatorship. So we have to, as their attorney, I would have to petition the court, ask for the court to set up a conservatorship, which means basically you're asking the court to manage the finances, pick someone to manage the finances. Conservatorships cost a lot of money, in the thousands of dollars. So let's just say you had a small estate. It doesn't make sense for that to do that. And also the court is choosing who that conservator is. And they also require you, the person who's going to be the conservator, the person who's going to take care of the money for the child, to be issued a bond, which is basically insurance policy so that that person won't run off with the money. It takes months. It can be complicated and time consuming, so you never ever want to list a minor as a beneficiary. I've seen it. I've seen that
we see it all
happen.
the
Yeah,
time.
and it's just this misconception out there. So if there's one takeaway today, do not list a minor as
Amen.
a beneficiary.
Other than my children. We're listening today to Wealth Matters, the radio show where we discuss the opportunities and challenges of preserving and managing wealth. We are your hosts today, Robert Port and Craig Frankel from the fiduciary litigation law firm of Gaswood Frankel. We're talking today with Chloe Moore with Financial Staples, Cherish De la Cruz with De la Cruz Law, and Alicyn McLeod with Atlanta.tax. And we're talking about financial and estate planning for young adults. Let's follow up a little on for children. When you talk about minors being beneficiaries, I do want to highlight that with a conservatorship, it's over at 18. So if you have a 17-year-old child and you listed them, even if there's a conservatorship, they get access to money right away. Are there ways to use beneficiary designations where the money will politely be given out at different times, whether it be a trust or something else? Is that possible as a designation?
Yes. So you can name a trust as a part of the beneficiary designation. As children are getting older, some children are not responsible at 18. And so if you start thinking about the parent's estate and how many assets, let's just say you had a couple of $1 million, do you really want Junior to get that money? I personally, I have 3 children. I wouldn't want that because I know that they would spend it on a brand new Lamborghini or something else. And so you can structure it in a trust so that it's either staged, you can give it to them during certain conditions. If you graduate from college, if you go to graduate school, whatever provisions you want, you can add that to the trust.
Allison, I have a kind of an odd question for you.
Go for it. I get odd questions all day long.
Let's shift gears. So one of the things that young people are going to be doing when they don't have children is they're going to be starting businesses.
Absolutely.
And they're going to be taking probably greater financial risk, and that's a good time to do it. Are there any kind of tax savings or things that young people can use under the new Tax Act that might be something we haven't thought of?
Well, I have to think about under the new tax laws, but I can tell you a few things. One thing that I recommend anyone starting a business, whether they're starting from scratch or whether they're buying a business, is first make sure they have a very good corporate attorney. They need to look over any and all documents, help generate documents, that sort of thing. Also, make sure you're starting out with a good accountant, someone who will keep your financials for you, work with you on understanding those if business is not necessarily your background. Both of those are definitely worth the money. So that's one of the best things I can offer. On the tax side, definitely make sure you structure your business in a tax efficient way to begin with. Sometimes it's kind of hard to go from one tax entity to another, and you may find later down the road that the tax structure you thought was great because everybody's doing it didn't help you at all because your situation is unique to you and you needed something tailored for you.
And I want to underscore something you said when you talked about the corporate attorney. What you're talking about is creditor protection. What you don't want to do is all of your personal assets to be lost because the business doesn't quite go the way you wanted.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the benefits, and probably one of the bigger benefits of working with a corporate attorney. I think another one, and I see this all the time, is the ownership problems. When you start a business or buy a business and you're the only owner, you don't think about that. But when you say, oh, well, I want my mom to be involved, I want my brother to be involved, I want my two best friends from college to be involved, you will have problems. And working with a corporate attorney from the onset, they're going to ask you all the exit related questions that you didn't even think about. What happens if another business partner becomes incapacitated or something like that? Like, what are you going to do? You would not have even thought to ask these things to yourself. So good fences make good neighbors. Your operating agreement will be structured in a way that hopefully everybody walks away from the table a little bit unhappy, and that ultimately long term will make everybody, hopefully will help make everybody happy. Or you may even realize that the person sitting across from you that you thought you were about to start a business with, it's not going to work, and on the front end, and that is money well spent.
Right, and one thing that we realize as attorneys is that the type of documents you're talking about, an operating agreement, a partnership agreement, a shareholders agreement, they can provide a roadmap
Yes.
for disentangling people. And many times, just like marriage, folks get into business, everything's going to be great, 50-50, whatever it is, and things don't often work out well. And then when there's no documents, we as attorneys are left with debates about what the intent was and what happened and how
Right.
come you got more than me.
You're trying to
and all
unscramble
that
an
stuff.
egg.
That's right.
Right.
So, Chloe, let me change the topic just a little bit. Well, a lot, maybe. One of the financial issues that again, people sort of think of and many people say yuck is insurance. Talk about what you like to see or recommend for clients vis-a-vis the range of insurance.
Yes. So I'd say the most important thing to start with is I'd say the life and health and disability for young clients who are married or have kids. There's definitely an insurance need there for life insurance to take care of their families. For young professionals, the biggest asset that you have is your ability to earn income. And so a lot of people forget about disability insurance, especially when you're a business owner. That's something that a lot of people just forget to insure themselves for their ability to earn income if something were to happen to them through an accident or illness.
And my recollection is the statistics are that you're more likely to be disabled and unable to work than actually pass away.
Correct. Yeah, so that's something that even if your employer provides disability insurance, in some cases, depending on your income level and the type of work that you do, it's definitely good to have supplemental coverage as well.
And Alicyn, explain a difference to our listeners. There's a difference between, for taxes, for employer-provided disability insurance versus buying it on your own that I think might be significant.
Yes, and I've certainly seen this play out on the inside of things unpleasantly. So, if you have life insurance, when that's paid out, generally the recipients aren't taxed on that. Disability insurance can play out two different ways. You may be taxed on the payments you receive in your disability, or you may not, and that depends on whether the premiums were deducted on the front end. So anything that's paid for by your employer, they're going to deduct as just a fringe benefit to you. So, you may not even think about it, and this goes to Chloe's point of pursuing supplemental insurance is, maybe it was so cheap for your employer to cover you under their disability policy, and that's great. At least you have something. But when those payments come to you, they'll be taxable. Whereas if you have a supplemental policy as an employee or just your own long-term disability policy as a business owner, as long as you don't deduct those payments on the front end, which I would never advise anybody to do, then in the payout, then those payments aren't taxed to you, and that's huge. It's definitely worth paying the tax on the premiums now, in case you ever want that tax-free money later, because you will need it. You will go through it quickly. You don't want to be paying any more tax than you have to in that situation.
So we are nearing the end of our show, so this is the fun part for me. So I'm going to ask each of you, you've got about 30 seconds. You have a captive 27-year-old who is thinking about getting married but has not yet gotten married. You've got 30 seconds to give them advice. Cherish, what's your advice?
Definitely keep your assets separate if you can. Have an advanced health care directive and a will, spelling out your wishes, and then also have a financial power of attorney.
Chloe, what's your advice?
My advice would be communicate, especially when it comes to financial matters and relationship matters. I think there's a lot of conflict with financial.
Okay, when you say
decisions.
communicate, tell us how one actually does that.
Well, for my clients who are married, I encourage money dates and just to talk about your
That
household.
sounds romantic.
Money date is, oh gosh, we don't have any money.
But
Preferably over wine. That's disgusting.
yeah.
But yeah, it's always good to have an understanding of your joint goals, your values, what you're spending, and just making sure that the household is running smoothly from a financial perspective.
Okay, Alicyn, we're talking about values now. What is your advice?
That one's really easy. I'll talk to a new client who is recently widowered, if that's a word, or just for whatever reason is now responsible for taking care of their tax situation, and they've not done that in the past. And it can be very confusing and overwhelming, especially in light of other things they may be going through. So my advice to folks who are getting married or are married, to the extent that it works for your relationship, try to approach your tax situation as partners. It's okay to delegate pieces of your tax situation, but come together and really understand it. Again, it is the biggest financial hit to your household. It's the biggest hit to your long-term wealth. So, don't abdicate to one partner your entire tax situation.
So my advice to our listeners is when you start thinking and you start getting your first job, call professionals to give you advice.
Amen.
So if somebody wanted to call you, Alicyn, how would they get in touch with you?
That's easy. I'm at atlanta.tax.
And Chloe, how would they get in touch with you?
Yes, my website is financialstaples.com, and all of my contact information is there.
Excellent. And Cherish?
My website is at www.delacruz, delacruz-law.com.
Well, thank you. As we're wrapping up our show, I want to thank everyone for listening to Wealth Matters, where we discuss the opportunities and challenges of preserving and managing wealth. For more information about Gaslowitz Frankel, please go to our website at gaslowitzfrankel.com. And remember to follow us on Twitter at Estate Dispute and use our show's hashtag Wealth Matters. Our guests today were Chloe Moore, CFP Principal and COO of Financial Staples, Cherish De la Cruz, Attorney and Partner at De la Cruz Law, LLC, and Alicyn McLeod, CPA and CFP at Atlanta.tax. Please join us every fourth Wednesday of the month at 8:30 a.m. here at Wealth Matters on Business RadioX.